Hi folks, thank you for tuning into Sunday School Bonanza, brought to you by This Week in Mormons. We are here, if this is your first time listening, we go through gospel doctrine lessons in a way that helps you get better prepared to participate in Sunday school and not just show up and just not know what's going to happen. You'll be more awesome this way. We're bringing back one of our fabled veterans of the program today. She's been, I guess you haven't been around for a little bit, but you've missed a set here. But Patricia Auxier is back with us, folks. And her last episode, everybody.
As Patricia Auxier,
yes. Yeah. She is betrothed. And so.
Getting married pretty soon.
Yeah, the magic is happening. And so.
But don't worry, I'm retaining an X in my last name.
Oh, yeah, you are.
Going to Doxy. So that works out.
So, and now you can steal her identity. Or her husband's, for that matter. But well, good. We're excited for that to happen, and actually, big thanks for Patricia for being here because she is very busy trying to organize things of the wedding nature, and so it's nice of her to waste some time with us today. So thank you, Patricia.
Happy to waste it.
Nice to have you here. So this lesson this week's lesson 45. It's called "If I Perish, I Perish," which is a quote from Esther, and we'll see if we get much into Esther or not because they kind of throw her at the end of the lesson, which I think sadly lends itself to. Many teachers might just not talk about her much. And of course, you pray about the lesson and the content of what you're going to want to do. I mean, I've had teachers who have focused on 2 verses out of an entire lesson and built a whole lesson around that, and that's fine. So if you're teaching, pray. Go ahead.
But make sure, even if you don't get to talk about her, that you study her because she's pretty awesome.
Yeah, she's the best.
Yeah, women's great.
Women are amazing. And so we're in the book of Daniel. In this one, we'll jump around mostly though in Daniel 1, 3, and 6. We're skipping some other chapters in Daniel because those will actually be on the next lessons, particularly the one about Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So that we have a whole lesson on that. So we're going to bounce around a little bit. For some light background on Daniel, he was actually a youth in Judah at the time of the Babylonian captivity. So he was carried away, but he was regarded sort of as an elect of the people. And so he was actually trained and brought up intentionally in the Babylonian court. As someone of note, particularly. And I believe when he was brought over, Nebuchadnezzar was, I'm not sure if he's actually king quite yet or not. I think he was like the prince at that time. Either way, he's king by this point. And Daniel's grown up in that circumstance. And we're going to see what happens, though, as he grows into adulthood and sort of how he and his friends as well stay true to their faith despite serious opposition.
Yeah, and I think they had an interesting relationship with the ruling party because they were, raised in the court, but they also were trying to stay true to this very distinctive religion that set them apart in a lot of ways. So I like how these stories really show how you can live in a society while holding true to your identity. So the first story that's talking about Daniel 1, very well-known story when Daniel and his friends, you know the story, they're there in the court and King Nebuchadnezzar offers all the kind of, younger men this diet that's heavy in wine and meat and food that Daniel and his friends really couldn't partake in. And they were feeling a lot of pressure to partake in it, but they were like, you know what, let's try an experiment. We're going to eat purse, which the lesson talks about is, grains and seeds and foods like that. And your people will eat that food and let's see who comes out in the end.
Well, and it's helpful because Daniel was kind of given his role, he was in with the servants. Like this wasn't something that it might have been risky, but he could pull it off in asking for pulse is what they ask for from the servants, which is just grains and seeds. No, you're fine. And I think that's, that takes some guts, though. I mean, I know, like you said, they're keeping their identity, which must have been so hard, especially after having left their own land. I mean, all they have really are the scriptures, assuming they were able to keep their scriptures and still sort of worship privately, and then carry on from what they remember in their time of their youth.
Yeah.
And they couldn't eat the meat, of course. Meat describes a lot of things. But when you think about this, I mean, these people were heathens as far as they were concerned. They didn't believe in Mosaic law. They didn't believe in draining the blood from an animal before eating it, stuff along those lines. And Daniel and his friends were just like, nope, can't do it. Got to abide by my own law of health that I have subscribed to. And so what happened to him?
So the natural comparison that people usually draw from this lesson is, of course, word of wisdom.
Sure.
Members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints live by a strict code that sets us apart. But I think the important thing to realize is it's not just about what we eat, but it's about all kinds of things we take in and how we choose to live our lives.
Yeah.
It reminded me of this one really great speech that a rabbi gave at BYU back in 1994, and he talked it's this really great talk called The Soul's Quest for God, and he says, "I'm a traditional Jew and I observe the biblical dietary laws. I suspect most of you assume I go around all day saying to myself, boy, would I love to eat pork chops, but that mean old God won't let me. Not so. The fact is, I go around all day saying, isn't it incredible? There are 5 billion people on this planet, and God cares what I have for lunch and what kind of language I use. I'm not diminished by being told there are certain things I may not do because they are wrong. Rather, it enhances me." And I think that's exactly what we see here with Daniel and his friends. King Nebuchadnezzar and his people thought, this is ridiculous. This is what's going to make you strong. But they really had faith in God and were faithful to their religion, and they came out on top.
And I think it's a great example as well of not bowing to any kind of pressure. It could have been very easy to just say, guys, let's just do this, because we could get punished or killed or anything along these lines.
God's going to understand.
God's going to understand. We're going to repent of it. We'll plead. We'll try to work around this, but God understands that this is a survival situation in many cases. Even though we're part of the royal court, we're still part of the sort of the minority, the different people. And yet they stick with it. And I think it's easy to think, this makes me really think about like how real is peer pressure? Like when I hear the words peer pressure, I think of the big easy things, alcohol and drugs and sex, like do this, guys, it's what's cool.
No.
But when I really think about what peer pressure is for us, not just as Latter-day Saints, but as humans, I think it's like a lot of the little stuff, like gossip or fault finding or entertainment or stuff like that, where little situations where we have an opportunity sometimes to think about what we believe in and stand up for it and do what we feel we should do. Mm-hmm. But we might cave because we don't want to rock the boat or be perceived as, unaccommodating or not one of the group. And I think there are always just these little things that are really easy to not do right.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking of different shows that I watch on TV, and seriously, some of them where I think I probably shouldn't watch this, it's like, oh, but then I won't understand, like when people, like there's this funny show, and I won't understand the inside joke.
Yeah, Patricia, The Wire is pretty hardcore. I don't think you're supposed to be doing that.
Thanks. But, sometimes it's just making a decision, like, what is more important to me, being on the inside of this joke, or choosing to partake of or not partake of things that aren't going to draw us closer to God.
Or you could even face more extreme situations, but I think it's fair to legitimately ask yourself, like, what if, I hate these dramatic ones, but what if you were in a situation where, you had like a gun to your head and someone...
You're so dramatic.
Oh, my goodness. Where you have a gun to your head and they say, we're going to shoot you unless you drink this alcohol.
I'll drink it, okay?
Yeah, but I guess these are things we have to ask ourselves.
Yeah.
Do you say, I'll drink it, okay? Or do you say, no, I have covenanted with God that I want to obey the law he gave to me. The outcome, whatever, because I've got my eye on the long-term prize here. This mortal vessel is not my everything. And I guess sort of speaking of the mortal vessel in that sense, as we move into Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who have some of the most awesome names.
Totally
in all Scripture.
awesome.
I really want to name my son Abednego.
Oh, totally.
Danielle?
Let's race
for
it.
Just got vetoed. Okay. But so these are Daniel's friends, great guys, very righteous guys. And at this point, Nebuchadnezzar, it's funny because he really did praise the Lord's servants. He was aware of sort of the piety and the devotion of his servants, and he liked it about him, but he seemed to forget a lot of it a lot of the time and would just kind of continually dwindle into idolatry. And so they created basically an idol of Nebuchadnezzar, this giant gold statue. And if you can imagine just how impressive that would be in person if you've never seen anything of this magnitude before, especially for the Jews. I mean, they saved all their best for the temple. And that was basically about it. Other than that, it was relatively austere, I think, for a lot of the things they did. And he said, you have to worship this, and if you don't, there will be punishment. So, what does Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do? Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean,
they won't do it. Right?
Yeah, they in the king's mind flaunted, but they like Daniel and his friends before, they decided to stay true and worship God.
And it's interesting when you read this, it mentions that the furnace was actually heated to, as it says in the scripture, 7 times hotter than it normally was. So I don't know if that's technical, but either way, it was basically brought up as hot as it could possibly be.
Hot.
And I found a few scholarly accounts that even insinuated that it was so hot that the servants who were required to put them in the furnace likely perished in the process because it was so hot. So he puts them in the furnace, but of course, what happens? Nothing happens to him. He basically leaves it to be for the time, and then he's amazed when they go and they see that they're just standing there, and they see a fourth person walking with them that we know it to be an angel. And that's just remarkable. Like, what an amazing story of preservation. And I love that their attitude going into it is all their whole attitude is just like, well, whatever, dude. Like, we know who our God is and we know what's true.
Right.
Throw us in the furnace. We're not only thinking about, oh no, preserve my mortal life. Like, I'm thinking about the long game here. And they're blessed for doing so. They could have very easily, just like anybody else, bowed down and like pretended to worship while kind of talking amongst themselves and put upon themselves the appearance of compliance, if you will. But they didn't do it. They stood up for it. And I like this quote from Neil A. Maxwell where he says, "We will not always be rescued from proximate problems, but we will be rescued from everlasting death. Meanwhile, ultimate hope makes it possible to say the same three words used centuries ago by three valiant men. They knew God could rescue them from the fiery furnace if he chose. But if not, they said, nevertheless, they would still serve him." And the great thing is, do you know what happened after this when they survived?
With King Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah.
No, I was looking up a talk. There was a really great talk called "But If Not," and it just talks about all the situations in which, God's gonna deliver us from this situation, but if not, we're still gonna serve him. And I think that happens a lot in our lives too. Like,
was this the one by Dennis E. Simmons?
That I think that might be.
Or there's also one by Lancey Wickman.
I know. I was trying to figure out which one it was. I think it was Dennis E. Simmons in the 2004 April conference. And I just think there's so many situations, where a sibling is sick. And you have to go into the thing like, please save my sibling, but if not, we're still going to serve you. I think that takes a lot of humility. It takes a lot of faith, and it takes a lot of perspective.
And it's very easy to want to dictate miracles on our own terms, I think, too. It's very easy to not say, but if not, we'll still do what you want. It's more like, God, we have faith. We're doing our part. Hold this up. And then instead we sometimes think like, but if not, I'm not going to try as hard.
Right.
I'm doing my thing. Something I think we all have to tell ourselves all the time. And what I love going into this is they come out, and at this point, Nebuchadnezzar, who's very forgetful, obviously, at this point actually says, I saw this angel with these guys. This is amazing. He doesn't adopt a state religion or anything, but he does say, I will condemn anyone who persecutes the faith of these men.
Right.
Which is an amazing moment for the Jews captive in Babylon at that point. So it protects them in a way, not a perfect way, but in a way. And then, of course, the sad thing is, as time goes on, we go through many kings. Daniel actually served in the court of, I believe, 5 kings overall.
Right.
And eventually,
lots of turnover.
A lot of turnover. And as you go through that many, of course, and this was a patriarchal system of kings, which meant they all had very short tenures, unfortunately, or lives, presumably, And we finally get down to Darius, who's not the same Darius of Persia, different Darius.
Right.
And Darius probably wasn't around for these miracles. If he's, 4 generations down, he might have heard of them.
Yeah.
Which could, I think, explain some of his sort of regression back into some of the same stupidity as some of his forebears. That's the best I can understand, that he just doesn't know any better. And so we get to Daniel, and then, do you know what happens in this instance with Daniel?
Yeah.
What goes down? Tell us. There's a lion, but why?
There's some lions involved. So, so in this situation, I think it isn't necessarily the king. I think the king at this point is the one who falls victim to peer pressure. Kind of the people in his court are kind of jealous of how the king prefers Daniel. And so they kind of trick the king into making a decree saying you couldn't pray to any god. Very tricky.
Other than the king.
Other than the king.
Pray to Darius and that's it.
Right. And, trying to feed his ego. And then later on, when Daniel continues to pray to God and the king realizes that he has disobeyed this law, he has to spend the night with the lions. And so he still, because he had prayed, he goes down there, spends the night in the lion's den, and of course, as we know, he comes out unscathed. And at this point, the king not only says, "Okay, we're gonna give you protection," but what does he say?
Well, basically,
which verse is it?
I don't know the exact wording, but he basically says that they're going to adopt Judaism. He
Right.
proclaims to the land that this is like the true faith that they all should espouse.
Yeah,
Just
because
jump on
back in those times, the gods that they worshipped, it wasn't just a matter of faith, but it was a matter of practicality. Like
Yeah.
any god that saved them from floods or saved them from famine was one that they were going to worship. So it was kind of a fickle game. It wasn't so much faith-based as a very practical. And, they had just saved Daniel from this very specific and imminent danger. So he's like, okay, he saved him from this very specific and imminent danger. So there's something to it.
I really like the parallels I see with Daniel and Joseph of Egypt, because I definitely see those. Because you see how Joseph, slightly different circumstances, but he was enslaved and eventually, and he worked his way up into the Pharaoh's court and was a trusted associate, could interpret dreams, much like Daniel.
Right.
Very interesting things. And you see, a lot of parallels here with the way Daniel was brought up in the things. He survived different things, but the positive effect it had. I mean, even the Jews originally under Egypt were not doing too poorly until many generations down the road when they became totally enslaved,
Yeah.
by the Pharaoh. And I found the actual quote. I love what Darius says. He says, "I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and steadfast forever, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. He delivereth and he rescueth, and he worketh signs and wonders in heaven and in earth, who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions."
Delivered him from the power of the lions.
Yeah,
That's
pretty
pretty
awesome.
awesome.
That's pretty awesome. So great lessons there. I guess. Do we have what do we think about Esther?
I think she's great.
Esther.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like she gets some good playtime because she's one of the few women in the Old Testament that's not of ill repute.
She's not a Delilah.
But I think she has a really important role. In role models for women in the church, and I think one of the quotes that I love that gets brought up is she said, was I not brought into a kingdom for such a time as this? I love her. I love how she goes back to her identity and her sense of purpose, and how in a trying time that must have been a really great boon to her, because she had a perception of who she was and what she was there for.
Yeah.
So
it's an amazing story. She lived shortly after the time of Daniel.
Right.
So I'm assuming she was probably born in Babylon. But we know she was very fair. Mm-hmm. And eventually she became the wife of the king.
One of the wives.
And of course, the thing to bear in mind, as we were talking before, is it was not common for women to be in positions of power.
Right.
It's practically not common even today, but especially back then. I mean, it was a very, very patriarchal system. And these were wives of kings. These were not queen consorts or equivalents or anything like that,
right.
But she still had some sway, and she definitely used that to the advantage of her people. It's amazing because the king just straight up married a Jewish woman because she was fair above all else, because that's what men's standards are, being what they are when you're a king.
She was probably really nice and smart too. Okay.
No, she was great. She was very wise. I mean, look at what she did. If you know the short version of the story. There's a guy, Mordecai, who I believe was Esther's uncle, right? Because her parents died.
Or her cousin.
He'd raised her. Mm-hmm. And the king commanded him and other servants to bow to a man named Haman. Haman was becoming a great captain of sorts, a great general. Mordecai refused because he's like, I'm not bound to anybody but my own true Lord, and that's all I'm going to do. And you see that this sets off this chain of events where Haman is, he wants to kill all the Jews, basically.
Right. Which is not a good thing. So Haman gets really upset by Mordecai's lack of respect, and so he convinces the king to make a decree where all the Jews were going to be killed, which was a little contradictory since one of his wives was a Jew. But, Mordecai goes to Esther and is like, hey, you could really have a potential to help your people out. Can you go to the king? Yeah. And Esther tries to explain, it's not that easy. Like Jeff was saying, the relationship of power was not, a queen. We think of someone being stately, but it was really kind of an awkward position because she did have some sway, but she had no really role in the court. And to go before the king without being invited to was a pretty risky move.
Yeah.
She probably, approached that time when she had planned to go talk to the king with a lot of trepidation because she doesn't really exactly know what's going to happen.
But she still makes it happen. And things work out okay. Eventually, Haman is actually hanged. And it takes a while because the order had already gone out to kill all the Jews, but they get around it and it works out okay. Pretty great examples of courage in the face of adversity. And I see a lot of that. The captivity period in Babylon is a very interesting time for the Jews. Away from their land, I don't believe we're at the point yet when many of them have been allowed to return necessarily, because they've returned a number of times from Babylon. Maybe we're past that part. No, I don't think we are. I'm not sure. I get mixed up. There's a lot of different lessons.
And it's not the books aren't chronological.
I get confused,
So it's kind of hard.
I should look at my chart. Either way, I love the Old Testament, and I'm sad that we're really down to only a couple more lessons left in the Old Testament. But,
yeah, there are only a few.
But I hope it's been enjoyable. Once again, folks, this is lesson 45. It's called If I Perish, I Perish. You're in the book of Daniel and in the book of Esther. Read through all of those. Check them out. We'll have links to various things up on our website at thisweekinmormons.com. We encourage you to send us an email at contact@thisweekinmormons.com. Give us feedback and all that. And, of course, listen to our regular podcasts, This Week in Mormons, and Third Hour of Power, which goes over the Priesthood and Relief Society manuals for the teachings of the presidents of the church. Oh, yeah, it's real. Patricia's giving
That's awesome. I hadn't heard of that one.
Oh, it's everywhere.
We're everywhere.
We're everywhere. But anyways, hope you'll do that, folks. Join us. Thanks for spending time with us. Patricia, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Happy nuptials to you.
Thank you.
All right, folks.